Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about how well does a Samsung Galaxy S20 Plus hold up now 4 years later. We're going to be getting to the specs, obviously once again how well it's holding up, should you buy this phone, all that stuff. But this phone is literally a forgotten beast. But before we get into that, make sure if there's anything I need to improve on in the comments, you comment that, let me know. I have a Pixel 4 giveaway going on, so if you want to enter that, just go to my TikTok and you'll see it. It just says Pixel 4 giveaway on a video. It's like, you'll see, or it just says giveaway, something like that. But let me stop the yap session now and let's go ahead and jump into this 4-year-old phone. Why it's a hidden beast, why it's a secret beast, why it's a forgotten beast, and why it's actually pretty good or pretty bad in 2024, 4 years later, once again. So first off, let's talk about the specs. I will pull them up on my trusty iPhone 13 and I will tell you the specs and if they're holding up compared to actual usage, because their specs are specs, but how well does it actually feel and holding up in your hands if you're planning on buying the phone now, or you have the phone 4 years later, 2 years later, however long you had the phone, or once again if you're trying to buy it for the future or buy it now. So let me go ahead and pull up the specs here. So I have the Samsung phone pulled up now. This phone has a 6.7-inch screen, which is still really big. The biggest Samsung phone now is the S24 Ultra at 6.8 inches, but the biggest phone Samsung's ever made is the S20 Ultra and the Samsung Note 20 Ultra at 6.9 inches, which I actually have. We can compare later in the video just in case you have some of these Samsung phones. I also want to compare to this phone side by side. So 6.7 inches, it's really big. It feels very nice in the hands, but I don't want to get into all this personal stuff like how it's feeling in the hands. I just want to talk about the specs really quickly. 64 megapixel main camera, really good camera, 8 gigabytes of RAM, Snapdragon or an Exynos, depending on the where you get it from. I definitely recommend Snapdragon version, so buy the phone from an American market, like somewhere in eBay with a VPN on America or something like that. I don't know. So if you're planning on buying this phone, definitely get the Snapdragon version. So the Snapdragon version though is a Snapdragon 865, and yeah, I was gonna start talking about it again, but once again, I'll get into that later because I can just yap for hours if you haven't realized already. So the phone has a 4,500 milliamp hour battery and 25 watt fast charging, 15 watt wireless charging, which really isn't that bad, but it's not super impressive. It's just like what an iPhone has now. 4 years later. Newer Samsung phones it just depends on the Samsung phone you get. They can get up to like 35 watts. Some Android phones get like 100 watts. It's crazy, but the battery life on those lasts like 1 day. Or the battery lifetime. This phone also has, once again with the screen, I should have just mentioned this earlier, but it wasn't pulled up right there, so that's my fault. 1200 peak nit brightness, 120 hertz screen, super nice screen. So I think that's all the specs we really need to care about. Like, I'll talk into the Android version, all that stuff here. But the storage options this phone comes in is like all the way up to 512 gigabytes of storage. Speaking of the camera, because I'm just keep scrolling, I keep seeing new stuff. The selfie camera is a 10 megapixel wide camera, and the main camera is obviously a 64 megapixel camera, the 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, and I think that's it. So around 3-4ish cameras. So I guess it's 3 cameras. Let me know in the comments if I'm wrong about that. I read all the comments. So around 3 cameras, 64 megapixels, and 2 12 megapixel cameras, but it looks like there's 4, so I don't know what I'm missing out on. I don't know if this thing is not pulling up. I don't know. But let's talk into the daily usage of this phone, because I have actually been maining this phone for quite a few days now, and every so often I come back to maining this phone, and it's actually holding up very well. I will say this though, if you've had this phone since it came out in 2020, it is probably very slow because you've been using it constantly for 4 years straight. While me, this phone is completely smooth, lag free. I haven't had any lag on this phone. That's also because it's on Android 13. So I guess we can jump into that too. It's on Android 13. Phone is no longer supported. The newest version of Android is 15. But this phone has had no lag for me whatsoever. But I guarantee if you are maining any Samsung phone that is at least 1+ or 2+ years old, they will definitely start slowing down. Like, it's guaranteed. Like, I know someone who upgraded from their Samsung Note 20 Ultra, which I have, which isn't lagging for me, but for them, they've had it since it came out, so it started slowing down for them, to the Samsung S24 Ultra. Now, that is a pretty big upgrade, but for me, or if you're trying to buy this phone now, it depends how long you're trying to use it. If you're buying this phone now, and okay, let's say you can custom ROM it, whatever it is, which I don't know how to do it, and most people probably aren't doing that. But if you can, then good for you. It probably will be smooth and stay consistent-ish over how long you keep this phone, a few years. But if you're trying to keep this phone for like 3 years, starting now, I wouldn't recommend it because it's just no longer supported and it's an old Samsung phone already. So it's not, and these apps, social media apps, are just going to get more and more big. No, they're just going to get bigger and bigger and more aggressive, needing newer processors. And Samsung processors are like, at least these older ones were like 2 years behind iPhones at the time, on Geekbench at least. But buying the Samsung S20 Plus now, you could, and you will be satisfied with it, but in 3 years' time, if you are trying to main this phone, it'll definitely start slowing down, considering in 3 years, it'll be 7 years old. But the thing is, in 3 years' time, a 7-year-old smartphone is not like a 7-year-old smartphone today. 7 years ago was like an iPhone X, a Samsung S8, which hold up. They both hold up horrible. But in 3 years' time, the Samsung S20 Plus will still be holding up for like this basic stuff, like the screen quality. It's literally a 1440p, 120 hertz panel, and the bezels are super small, and it has a 6.7-inch screen. So the screen itself, unless you want to talk about the brightness, which isn't, I mean, it's bright enough, 1,200 peak brightness, but newer Samsung phones get like 3,000, 2,500, whatever it is. But the fact that this phone in 3 years' time will last way better than phones 7 years ago. So, if that makes sense. So, this phone, display wise, is honestly beautiful. Once again, look at this panel, the curved screen. This is the last ever Samsung phone with a curved screen, or at least Plus model with a curved screen. The Samsung S21 Plus had a flat display, and I thought, or think, it looks uglier than this phone. This phone is absolutely beautiful. Also comes in that nice blue color. Most people don't like this design. I personally do. I think it's very, very beautiful. But we're done with the display talk now. Let's talk about the camera quality, which I did jump into a little bit, but the camera on this phone is absolutely amazing. It has 30 times zoom. I'll show you some photos I took on this phone here. And that 64 megapixel camera, that is definitely holding up. I took this at my college campus. As you can see, this is not, maybe I should turn up the brightness. This is not a bad photo. You could take this in 3 years and maybe be like, oh, it's not that good, but it's getting the job done. You know what I'm trying to say? And I'll show you some more photos here. Look at this. This is not a bad photo. Phones are so good now, even 4 years ago, like, you don't need to upgrade every year like you did 7 years ago, or 10 years ago. Like, my dad still uses the iPhone 12 Pro Max, and that one famous TikToker had the 13 Pro Max, went from the 16 Pro Max, then he downgraded because he went back to his 13 Pro Max because it was underwhelming. So let me know who that, I think that was Dylan's page, actually, so got it before I could say anything. But anywho, I'm really all over the place, but it's okay. No, but let's talk into the daily usage of this phone. This phone, once again, doesn't lag. It is on Android 13 once again, but the battery life on this phone, it's around 4.5, 5-ish. I want to say 5-ish hours of screen on time. Now, 5 hours of consistent usage. This thing can maybe last you 3 days, depending on your usage. Like, you're not going to be using it for however 50 hours straight. For me, it lasts 5 hours, is what I'm saying, at 120 hertz, which definitely slows it down. And I want to be comparing it to these other Samsung phones I have side by side, just in case you are considering upgrading, or you have one of these Samsung phones and you're considering getting the Samsung S20 Plus. Once again, you won't be disappointed with this phone, but because it's like it's literally so good. But I just wouldn't recommend it because it's not supported, and I would just recommend getting one that is supported because it will last longer, if that makes sense. But here's a Samsung S8 Plus compared to this phone. As you can see, they're around the same size. If you are considering the S20 Plus from the Samsung S8 Plus, I would definitely recommend that. And that is a major upgrade, even from the Samsung S7, obviously. This is a huge upgrade. Like, it's a need. I got my Samsung S20 Plus. I'll jump into that real quickly while we're comparing other phones. This is Z Flip 4. But I got my Samsung S20 Plus for $150. Now, for $30 less, you can get the Samsung S21. I got my S21 for $120. I was lucky. They average around the same price as the S20 Plus. So if you're thinking of getting an S20 Plus, maybe you could get the S21. Now, I will say this. The Samsung S20 Plus, It feels a tiny bit faster than the S21, and that's most likely because of the battery. But the Samsung S21 is super smooth because it's on the newest version of Android, which every year, at least recently, Samsung has been improving the animations. So I will say this. Let me do this quick yap real quick. The battery life on the S20 Plus is better than the S21. I don't know if that's obvious, but if you were thinking of getting the S21 or S20 Plus, just save. It just depends. Whatever one's cheaper. I'll just say that. Whatever one's cheaper. Because they both have their flaws and benefits. And this is the Samsung Note 9 compared to this phone. Major upgrade if you are doing this. The speed upgrade is there. It is a big upgrade, but it won't be as impressive if you were to go from an S22 or go to the S22 Plus instead of the S20 Plus from a Note 9. Samsung Note 20 Ultra, 6.9-inch screen, both on Android 13. Both of these two phones are. Obviously, don't go from a Note 20 Ultra to a Samsung S20 Plus. I doubt anyone's doing that. Samsung S21, major upgrade because the S20, not the S21, the A51 is laggy as hell because it has a really bad processor. Scores around 300 on Geekbench 6, while the Samsung S20 Plus scores, if I remember correctly, around 1,000, which is good. Well, I guess it's decent for a 4-year-old phone. Samsung S20 FE. I obviously have both of these phones. Samsung S20 FE does feel laggier than the Samsung S20 Plus, and they literally have the same processor and on the same version of Android, and I don't know why that is. I used to main the S20 FE when it was quite new, and that thing was laggy. So I think Samsung's probably slowing down these phones, the cheaper ones at least. And here's a Samsung, that's just a theory of mine. This is a Samsung Z Fold 3. So should you go from a Z Fold 3 to the S20 Plus? No, because the battery life is better on the Z Fold 3 and it's newer. Samsung S10e. Now, the Samsung S20 Plus, let me say something real quick. Obviously have 3 phones lined up. S10, the next year the S20 came out, then the next year after the S20, the S21 came out. The jump between the S20 and the S21 based on speed, is, at least now, is non-existent, to be honest. I mean, I did say the S20 Plus is faster in my experience, barely faster than the Samsung S21. The S21 is smoother because it's on the newest version of Android. But if this were the base model S20, going from the base model S20 to the S21, tiny upgrade. Going from the Samsung S10 to the S20, big upgrade. So there's a bigger jump. Let's look at this like this way. The size jump between the S10 and the S20 compared to the S20 to the S21. As you can see, it's like a little spacing in between. So the S20 Plus is just, or the S20 in general, those probably Samsung's best year, at least over the past 7 years, whatever. Samsung A54 to S20 Plus. S20 Plus is better in my experience. I mean, technically not, but the A54 is just laggy. That's my issue with the A54. And it literally scores the same as the Samsung S20 Plus, but yet it's so much laggier. Samsung A23 5G, Samsung S20 Plus, significantly better, even though the A23 5G is literally on the newest version of Android. But I think that's all the Samsung phones I have. So yeah, that is. But so now that I'm done with that yap session with the phones, if you're considering buying this phone once again and you want to have MagSafe, you could just buy a MagSafe case like I have here. But the ones I have like these little rings around the camera, which I definitely would try to take those off if you could. So I think this video has been long enough. I'll go over some quick stuff real quickly. The fingerprint scanner here does not disappoint. Face ID is really good. It's not as good as iPhone's Face ID because iPhones have like built-in sensors, while the Samsung phone is just a 2D Face ID, but it's not bad. It is definitely not bad. Battery life on this phone, it's not bad in my experience. 5.5 hours screen on time, depending on your usage, that could last you a few days, or it could only last you 5.5 hours of being on the phone straight like I am. 120 hertz feels super smooth. This phone, no lag. I can't stress it enough. These apps are still going to be supported on this phone for at least 4 years. The Android is obviously no longer supported, but this phone has like 1 year to 2 years left of security updates in it. So would I recommend getting the S20 Plus? I said no, but if you can find it for a really good deal, this phone does not disappoint. But if you can spend a little bit more money and get an S21 Plus or S22 Plus, S22 in general, I would recommend it because they're going to be supported longer. But if you buy the Samsung S20 Plus, you won't be disappointed with this phone. It's just literally too good it's too good for itself, dude. So thank you for watching. Let me know, once again, I said this in the beginning, if there's anything I need to improve on. And some video ideas in the comments if y'all want me to make a video on a certain phone or something like that. So once again,